It's been several decades now since people have been moving out of the urban environment into rural communities, especially the Sierra foothills. They're leaving behind freeways and congestion and high cost of housing. And they're settling down up here and making it home. But now we're facing a new issue, and it's one we have to address. It's one of fire in rural communities. So we're about to embark on a learning experience from a variety of people who are experts, who are going to tell us what we need to do to protect our home, our families, our neighbors, and most importantly, what we should be doing as a community to collectively address the problem. Not one person can solve this. Not one fire district can solve this. It's going to take all of us.
Hi, I'm Mary Owens with Owens Estate and Wealth Strategies Group. Welcome to On Point. Our guest speaker this time is Jim Turner, the Fire Chief for Nevada County Consolidated Fire District. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Mary.
We appreciate your time that you're taking out of your very busy schedule, and we also appreciate, we know we're going to be talking to someone that really has a lot of information that's important to all of us. So if we could start, could you give us a broad overview of the historical perspective of the fire danger in California communities?
Well, the community of Nevada County falls within a rating system with the California Department of Forestry, CAL FIRE, and we're in what they call extreme fire behavior. And it's based on some things with our climate, the fuels, which means the vegetative growth within the community, temperatures we see throughout the year, and some of the history of the fires.
We have a lot of homeowners that are wanting to move into these fire zones because they want to escape the city environment and live that rural life. It's become very attractive for people moving up, retired folks out of the San Francisco Bay Area and LA as well.
They do, and they've moved into areas that maybe do not have the same services as what they're used to, but they're independent of that city life.
Yes.
But it puts them in a situation of what we call the wildland-urban interface. It's where the buildings hit the wildland. So what this does is creates kind of a difficulty for us, because now we have homes, sometimes very large homes, out in the middle of dense forests or dense wildlands. And protecting those from wildland fire, it becomes a difficult task. Well, I started with Nevada County Fire Services about 30 years ago. And at the time we started, we never saw the significant wildfires that we have today. Wildland fire season was about a period of maybe 3 to 4 months long in the summertime. That has now been extended to anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And what's driven that is two things. One, increased population, where a lot of people have chosen to move from the city life, the high populated areas, to more of the rural communities. They like their privacy. They like the heavy growth of timber, being out in the woods. But that also puts now an added task on fire department resources, providing protection for those individuals living out in what we call the wildland urban interface area. So with those, and also a lot of fuel growth over the years. And when I talk about fuels, everything from the grass to the brush, timber harvest that are no longer taking place, so we have more denser forest.
The underbrush is really developed.
It has, and that's what we call our ladder fuels. Our ladder fuels are what allows a surface fire to basically take the steps and get up into the treetops or the canopies and run.
And spread.
It does, and those are very difficult to control without mechanized equipment such as our aircraft. It takes a lot of coordination, a lot of resources, but when a crown fire surfaces, we tend to lose a lot of acreage because of the uncontrollability of it. The fires that we've seen increase, years ago we went through drought, and a lot of the grass seed was very receptive, but it was just waiting for that moisture.
Yes.
What we're seeing this year is tons per acre is how we measure the fuels on a piece of land. We're seeing the fuel loading from the grass component because all that seed now has sprouted, it's grown, and we're seeing levels per acre, tons per acre that we've never seen before.
So by September of this year, it's going to be a real challenge. Fires will be more easily started. Just a simple backfire hitting a rock, a small spark, those fuels, those ladder fuels are now even in a more dangerous point than they were before.
They certainly are, and when we look at grass is probably one of the components that is most reactive to moisture. It's what we call a light and flashy fuel. So that means in the evening hours when maybe we get some humidity in, it's very receptive to changing its properties, but it's also very receptive to drying out very quickly. And light and flashy fuels, just that, they have a very quick burn time. They can be very intense, but allow for real dramatic spreads in fire. So it's definitely one of our concerns is the amount of grass we're seeing, especially in the lower elevations, the South County, on the west side, throughout Penn Valley, down into Smartsville, and certainly down in the valley areas of Sacramento and Placer County.
With the advent of all these fires, we're certainly seeing a response from the communities attempting to assist you and all the firefighter community to address the problem and get ahead of it. We are all guilty that we let this problem build for decades without really addressing it. But the fire problems we're having, for example, the campfire, there was clearly a very rural community, lots of trees, but the types of fires we've also had now haven't been always in just rural. The ones I want to talk about, for example, the first one that impacted my life because I watched it burn was the Berkeley fire. And that was a rural area in the middle of an urban area. And the escape routes were minimal, and that's why how so many people died. Are they solving those problems right now as far as new development? Because if they are, I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing the opposite. We're building a lot of communities with very limited escape routes. And as you're trying to direct evacuations, how do you avoid sending people to a place that is increasing their danger in order to ultimately try to get away from it? That's got to be a challenge for you.
It is a challenge, and you bring up the Berkeley fire, and out of the Berkeley fire, there were so many changes that a lot of citizens haven't seen, and it truly affects how we fight fire today. I'll give you kind of a little history on, we had resources down on the Berkeley fire that came from our volunteer agencies. At that time, there was no coordination. We found ourselves not being able to get water out of the hydrants because they had a different type of thread pattern than we were used to. The mutual aid system, which California has probably the finest master mutual aid system in the United States. In fact, a lot of different states come to us to inquire, what they can do, how they can improve theirs. But that is all stemmed from those type of fires. We're always looking at ways to improve. Out of Berkeley also, a lot of roadway standards came into play where we have now the accessibility to get our equipment past as we allow evacuations to take place. There were areas in the Berkeley fire that we couldn't have got to get an apparatus.
You couldn't even make the turns.
You couldn't even make the turn.
Right.
Not to lessen the factors of what they were allowing for slopes and driveways. So all those standards have changed over the years. So we make sure that one, the roadways are large enough to support our apparatus, both weight and width, and then also the incline or steepness of the driveways doesn't exceed our capabilities. About 2010, within this community, the Board of Supervisors enacted an ordinance that allowed for the non-locking of fire access gates. And you'd think, why would you put a lock on a fire access gate?
That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense at all, and they recognize that. So now, any fire access gate put in after 2010 cannot be locked. It has to be maintained. It has to have proper signage that it is deemed as a fire access, and the roadways have to be maintained so we can pass either citizens through there or fire apparatus through there. So it's what I call, for lack of better words, catastrophic reform. When you have a significant incident, it's what forces change. And so whether it's done at state level, local level, or independent level, change usually comes out, and we'll see change come out of the campfire out of Paradise once we have all the information from that. That'll probably change the way we do operations again, or try to improve those little things that'll benefit citizens for evacuations.
Now in the campfire, one of the things they're talking about that is so very challenging is going to be the toxic cleanup from the amount of chemicals that were created and released into the air and into the ground and soil from the fire itself. In the evaluation of the campfire, does the fire department get involved in that process of figuring out what those toxic chemicals are and maybe how we can avoid those in future building, or is that some other department within the state of California?
Usually that's done by an environmental health department, whether it be at county level or state department. We do have expertise in hazardous materials, and if, sometimes we'll sit on boards to review stuff like that, but normally that's done at a higher level through an environmental agency, whether it be county or state level.
Now, I'm aware, and I realize this is a very political process with a lot of challenges to get the coordination. I think everyone's read about the addressing of the fire issues in our national forests and coordination with local communities, because if national forests aren't taking care of, the local communities nearby are clearly endangered. So I won't ask you to get into that political process, because I'm sure that has a lot of bumblebees flying around in it. But in relation to local communities, I know that California has really gone out of its way to create fire-wise communities. Can we talk about the development of that and what they're doing?
Certainly, that's kind of a hidden gem we have within the community. Fire-wise communities are groups, whether it be homeowners, whether it be an organized homeowners association, but they have taken an oath to do the things around their property, assist their neighbors, whether it be in education or actually maintenance of their properties, to come to what the state standard is under Public Resource Code 4290, 4291. Within Nevada County, we have the Firewise communities. There's, I believe, about 25 or 26, which we are second only to Marin County in the state of California.
That's wonderful.
There's approximately 20 or 25 additional communities that are somewhere in the process awaiting certification. And then we have the Firewise Coalition, which is kind of a governance over all these little communities, and they're roughly 45,000 individuals strong. So it is, it's an amazing feat that the Firewise Council has worked with.
Because they're boots on the ground, they see the problems, they're identifying them before they become the immediate problem. So tell me a little bit about what the Firewise community does. Let's say they go into a neighborhood and they create a Firewise community. How do they qualify for that certification?
So what they'll do is, through the Firewise Council, they'll come up and do an evaluation, and that can be from actually walking the premise of a community or meeting with homeowner groups. And then they also bring in registered foresters, taking a look at what needs to be done. They work with the homeowners to show them what needs to be done around individual properties. They develop a plan. They spend X number of hours working towards this through the National Fire Protection Association. They receive certification. Now that certification is just not a, for lack of better words, a plaque on the wall. It can actually help reduce homeowners insurance with some carriers. I've heard several of them will give a discount if you're within a Firewise community. So it is truly beneficial not only for the community itself, but it assists us, because when we come into an incident, if we know that that's a Firewise community, they've taken proactive steps that allows us a safe environment to defend, their property, versus where we may be out in an area that it's not even safe for our crews to go into.
For example, if you bring a large truck, even a water tanker truck, down a road that's narrow, it can't turn around, and the fire suddenly comes upon you, you're endangering not only your crew, but your equipment.
We are.
So a fire-wise community, if they're really going to address the real problem, creates turnaround areas, do they have alternative escape routes, and they have somewhat collective agreement to maintain or enforce maintenance of everyone's property. So it is, each person is contributing to the safety of the others.
They are. And, you know, Firewise community, they can take additional steps if they want to, you know, choose to work with the county to improve fire access. They're a strong voice in this community. And it truly, you know, the big benefit that we have with them is just that they provide a safer environment for our crews working to be able to do their job. I like to say to our community, it's if you provide the defense, we'll provide the offense. And what that means is if you do your part, that allows us to come in and do our part.
And you'll have a stronger offense.
And we do.
Absolutely, you know, because of it.
It's not one of those things where we have to go in and we have to take action and maybe do that work that could have been done earlier by the homeowner. This allows us to go in, you know, prepare the structure for protection and rapidly move in between structures. Because a lot of times we're limited on the amount of resources we have. So it's not uncommon if we have a fast-moving fire that we will have one engine company between 5 or 6 homes trying to protect them. It's not one engine for every house in the community.
Now, whether you're in a fire-wise community or let's say you're in one that hasn't established those rules yet, but there is clearly a homeowner or a property owner that is creating an imminent fire danger. What are the legal steps that a community can take and the fire department can take to reduce that danger?
That's a great question. So Public Resource Code 4291 is what the state has adopted through CAL FIRE to provide defensible space. And there's certain criteria in there, but what, you know, is 100 feet of clearance throughout your property, not having combustibles piled up close to the house. So a lot of what we receive is complaint driven, and it's kind of what you're speaking of right now. If you've got the neighbor that everybody else is doing their part and they're just not doing it, you can contact your local fire department. Most of them have some type of complaint form that you fill out, and we'll send an inspector out to take a look at it. If the agency you call or live within their jurisdiction doesn't have Department of Fire Prevention, it can be referred to the county, and we have a county fire planner that can do the same thing. So there are avenues to make and mitigate those hazards. The county is working right now on a hazardous vegetation ordinance, which what occurs with if the ordinance passes from Public Resource Code 4291, basically the defensible space around one's property can only extend to its property lines. So if you have a home that you only have 30 feet to your property line, how do you get your 100 feet of clearance?
Right.
Well, this ordinance will allow jurisdictions to work with both parties, the homeowner that's trying to gain space and maybe the neighboring homeowner on a split cost or a shared cost to allow that individual to gain that 100 feet of clearance. So it's a step in the right direction to allow for better clearance around structures, which means less fire danger if a significant fire comes through.
Now, if a citizen wants to file a complaint and fill out the form, do they remain anonymous or do you have to disclose their name?
So it's kind of a two-part question. So we require within our jurisdiction that you have to leave your name and contact information, but that is not disclosed to the individual that you're enforcing on. So it's kind of a two-part, but we have to have a way to validate if we have to take it further.
You have to contact them to be able to pursue the complaint.
Correct.
But it is in a situation where it's mandatory if you disclose this person filed a complaint against you and we're investigating. You're not required.
No.
That's wonderful.
So normally what we'll say is, you know, we've received a concern about your property, we're here to inspect it, but no, we will not bring the individual's name in.
Now, in Nevada County, besides clear undergrowth, are there specific species of plants that are preferable to be eliminated from your property?
We're not asking you to remove all of the fuels. What we're asking you to do is to break them up where we don't have a continuous fuel bed. So, manzanita is one, some people, it's a beautiful plant to them, but they have to realize that, it is in close proximity to home. It is an avenue where fire travels, and it travels very hot and very quickly because of that fuel. Same thing with the Scotch broom. But our biggest concern is when they meet critical fuel moistures and they're readily to burn, because of that oil content in them, the heat that comes off those is significantly more than you would see from an oak shrub. So what does that mean? That means that you have the potential of firebrands extending further. Firebrands are, a lot of people consider them embers, what we call them
Yes.
firebrands. A hotter, quicker fire, so spread is increased. Those are the type of things that we get concerned with manzanita. And the other thing is when manzanita tends to die out, that the fuel oil content in there is still critical levels even when the manzanita is dead. So, I've heard of people, and we've responded in the wintertime, that they have cut manzanita and used it in their wood stove, and it tends to create chimney fires. I've seen it where the wood stoves have turned completely red. So it's a very hot burning fuel.
Now, if we have a situation where we're trying to prepare potentially, we've been put on evacuation alert, but it's not yet mandatory, but we see embers coming. Does it help if a homeowner, and helps a firefighter, if they sprinkle their yard down, wet their roof, do things along those lines? Is that a significant mitigation effort that's worthwhile?
At that point, if you have embers coming down or brands coming down, it's too little too late. The biggest thing we ask of the community is when you're asked to evacuate or prepare to evacuate, do those things. Don't wait. And I've heard it over and over, well, it's a ridge away from us, the fire. The smoke hasn't got here. Well, when the smoke arrives there or the ember cast comes down, you've waited too long.
You should have already been gone.
You should have already been gone. I would rather see, and we've been asked, do I shut my propane tank off? What I want you to do is get your family out of there, in a timely manner. And please, when we ask you to evacuate, don't stay behind. Evacuate at that time. But when it comes to watering the lawns or sprinklers on the roof, one of the first things we see go within these fires is the infrastructure. So most likely the electrical's going to go down, and whether you're on a well or something like that type that it needs an external power source, you're probably going to lose it. So the benefit is truly not going to change the outcome. One of the things that can help with is what we call hardening of structures, and that's making sure your gutters are cleaned, having the gutter covers on there so you don't get a brand down in the gutters, making sure screens are properly placed over holes, ventilation holes within the house, that you close windows, you remove debris from the deck, and that debris may not only be vegetation materials, but if you have lounge furniture or lounging furniture where it's got a material to it that's a receptive fuel bed, so if a spark lands on it, that'll burn. Those type of things are what we ask people to do ahead of time.
Get them off your deck.
Get them off your deck. So those things are truly beneficial to us, because that's the first thing we do when we arrive at a house to protect it. Is we'll walk around it and we'll identify those things. We'll move those combustible products away from the home. We'll shut windows. We'll remove the outside furniture off the deck. So if you can do that ahead of time and well in advance and evacuate, you've helped us out tremendously.
Now, would it help you if citizens did things like put signs in their front yard, "We're already evacuated"? I look at all these firemen desperately going to every door and making sure they're gone. I think, My gosh, what a waste of time if they just could have notified them they're already gone. Is that useful, or do you need to double check anyway because people might purposely mislead you?
So that's a great question, and there's a lot of research being done right now. We've got communities that have taken the lead in doing the research. There's some liability issues with us not making contact at the home.
Yes.
You know, what happens if, you know, it's one of the things we approached with was a red and green. You know, if the red is there, that means that somebody's still home. If the green's there, it means go. You know, what happens if that gets twisted around and all of a sudden, you know, we see green, but
it was meant to be red.
It was meant to be red. What happens if a neighbor forgets that the person in the home is not ambulatory? Those type of things. So, you know, there's programs out there. The biggest thing we're looking at is that you have to stay consistent throughout the county. I can't have one community doing one thing and another community doing something else, because when you're bringing in resources,
then you have no certainty whatsoever.
You have no certainty at all. If you go on My Nevada County or CAL FIRE's website, Ready, Set, Go, that's part of the preparation. And not only having your property ready to go, having yourself ready to go, having a plan, having what we call a go bag. In that go bag, and it could be set up where, if you talk about you've got a elderly neighbor that maybe not be ambulatory that you've taken responsibility for, if they've got their go bag set up, those are the type of things we ask in there, and there's a whole list for the check off, you know, whether it be medications, important documents, contact numbers, because we saw that in the camp incident where at one point, I believe there was over 1,500 people missing.
Yes, missing.
But a lot of it was because the communication wasn't there that, hey, I'm fine, I've made it out. And that's where early communication and having a place to meet really are beneficial. So if I call you and say, we have a fire in our area, we're getting ready to evacuate here, and we've set up ahead of time, okay, our meeting place is, we're going to meet at a such and such restaurant in Grass Valley. You know to come there first. If I'm not there, then you take other actions. But having that early communication, a place to meet, because cell phones are going to be either, infrastructure is going to be down, or the lines are going to be overwhelmed as far as many people trying to utilize them. So having that pre-plan in place, and that Ready, Set, Go program is a tremendous program. You can find it, you know, both on Nevada County websites and CAL FIRE. But having that plan, and not only having it, communicating it with your family members and friends, or whoever you want in your inner group. I think, you know, one of the things that I get approached a lot with our constituents of the county and from other areas is they wanted a definitive evacuation plan. And when I say definitive, they want agencies to tell them, if a fire occurs, where do I go to get out of here? And I think people, they really need to have an understanding of how fire behaves. When we look at the rules of fire behavior, it's a three-pronged system. One is the weather, one is topography, and the other is fuels. And if you look at that as a triangle, there's only one element of that we can control, and that's the fuels. Because the weather is what it is, and the topography is what it is also. And I use the analogy, if you look at the topography and water will run down it, fire will come up it. So avoiding those areas, you know, is a must for your safety and what we do for the safety of our crews. But when we talk about evacuations, if I were to post ahead of time and tell you, you live in Alta Sierra and Alta Sierra Drive is going to be your evacuation route. Fire is very dynamic until we arrive on scene and see what the winds are doing, what the topography is, where the fire is going. I could be potentially sending you into harm's way.
You actually could put them in more danger than less.
And we have to coordinate, you know, not only the evacuation, but how do we get our resources in there to mitigate the fire. So there's a lot of process that goes through. We work very cooperatively with law enforcement because they are actually the authority that has jurisdiction to impose an evacuation. So those are the type of things we meet, and we meet very quickly on it. We spend maybe 3 to 5 minutes once we're together taking a look at where the fire is moving, what we need evacuated. Nevada County has what they call Code Red. Code Red, if you do not belong to it, you need to go on the county's website and sign up for it, because what it does is now if there's an affected area and a notification needs to go out, it goes through your cell phone, it goes through your home phone, and we've actually taken it a step further. So if you're in proximity to a cell tower that it pings off of, even if it's not, you're not from the area,
You'll get
notification. So very important to make sure that you have your number that's best to be contacted at through the Code Red system or sign up for it.
So it also means the homeowner should take the responsibility of becoming intimately familiar with every possible evacuation route out of their community and know it well enough that they could articulate finding it and getting out even in the dark.
Certainly. You know, we become creatures of habit. And the reason I say that is if I work in Sacramento, I take normally the quickest, most efficient route to work every day.
Yes.
And that may be, you know, for 5 years, and maybe for 20 years, and that's the only route I travel. So what I like to tell people is that get out and take a Sunday drive. Get out on the roadway, figure out where these roads go. What's an alternative means to get out of a community that I've only traveled, you know, one means of egress through. The other thing with that is that, and why that becomes so important, is that during a catastrophic event, it's fight or flight syndrome, and we tend to revert back to what we know best. So if every day I go out Sierra Drive and it's in the middle of the night, I'm just barely awake, there's smoke conditions, I'm probably going to drive to where I know best, and that's out Sierra Drive. But that may not necessarily be the best route out.
Right.
So having that additional knowledge of different means to get out of your community, it's critical.
So if you know where the fire's coming from because you've signed up and you understand, the other option that leaves available to you is of the major escape route that most people are taking is so jammed it's not moving. Now you may find another less used roadway to get out.
Certainly, certainly. And part of the overloading of evacuation routes tends to occur when people wait till the last minute to evacuate.
Yes.
So evacuate early when you're first notified. Have a plan so you don't have to waste time, you know, putting things in your vehicle to get out. You should be, I like to tell people that when we train our firefighters when they're new, especially during the summertime, prepping for a fire starts way before the call even goes off. And what I mean by that is that I expect them, when they walk out in the morning, coming from home to go to work, I want them to sense, oh, you know what, there's a breeze blowing today. It's warmer than it's been before. I'm working outside and all of a sudden it just, the temperature's increased by 10 or 15 degrees, the wind's picked up. That's what the homeowner needs to do also. They need to be paying attention to weather reports.
Be aware.
Be aware. You see, for us, the predominant wind in Nevada County is a southwesterly wind. The dangerous wind that we receive is a northeasterly wind because it's a drier, colder wind. So even if the fuels, the temperature outside is not what we expect during a fire, the winds that it creates and the dryness of them tend to rapidly spread fires. If you ever have an opportunity to look at an aerial view of a wind-driven fire, it's a very narrow, lenticular shape, normally not very wide but fast moving. At one point in the campfire in Paradise, that fire was consuming a football field every second.
That's amazing.
You know, and everybody, you know, whether you play sports or not, you can visualize a football field and imagine that consumed in 1 second. And that's where it comes back to, if you're asked to evacuate, evacuate immediately, because there's nobody that can outrun something that's moving that quick.
Well, Jim, thank you so much.
Oh,
this has been so
pleasure.
very informative, and I'm sure our audience is going to be pleased to be able to watch this and learn how to keep themselves safe.
Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.